Have you ever laughed at a sarcastic comment while something in your chest tightened? You smiled, sure, but later you kept thinking about it. Was that a joke or a jab? Did they mean it? Was I supposed to say something? Sarcasm is everywhere. It's clever, it's quick, it's often funny. But beneath the humor, it's doing something else. It's shaping the emotional safety of our relationships. It's teaching people whether they can trust the words that come out of someone's mouth. And more often than we realize, it leaves people feeling small, unsure, or quietly hurt. Today we're talking about the psychology of sarcasm, why we use it, what it protects, and how it lands on the people we care about. Because some jokes aren't just jokes, they're emotional messages in disguise.
This is The Psychology of Us with Professor R.J. Starr, a podcast that examines how we think, feel, and relate, from everyday habits to the deeper patterns we don't always see. For anyone curious about why we do what we do, each episode offers thoughtful insight into human behavior, grounded in psychology and designed to make sense of real life. If you're looking for understanding that feels both human and honest, you're in the right place. So let's begin.
Let's be honest, sarcasm is everywhere. In family dinners, workplace banter, friendships, even the way we talk to ourselves. It's stitched into the rhythm of how we connect. We use it to be funny, to be clever, to take the edge off something that might otherwise feel too raw or too direct. And sometimes it works. It lands well. It makes people laugh. It keeps things light. But other times, it leaves a mark. There's a kind of confusion that sarcasm creates, a moment where you feel something shift in the air, but you can't quite name it. You know it didn't feel good, but calling it out seems dramatic. Saying, that kind of hurt, makes you look like the problem. So you stay quiet, or you laugh it off, or maybe you just hold it. And over time, that becomes a pattern. We tend to think of sarcasm as harmless. We say things like, they didn't mean anything by it, or don't be so sensitive. But today, I want to look closer, because sarcasm, for all its humor and cleverness, is also a form of emotional messaging. It reveals something about how we relate to others, how we express discomfort, how we mask vulnerability, and how we hold power in a conversation without ever raising our voice. In this episode, we're going to dig into what sarcasm really is beneath the surface, why we use it, what it signals, and why, for so many people, it leaves them feeling just a little bit unsafe. So, let's start with something simple. What is sarcasm? Psychologically, sarcasm is a form of verbal irony. It's when someone says one thing, but means the opposite, and the listener is supposed to pick up on the difference. It relies on tone, timing, and context. And it's not always obvious. You're expected to read between the lines, decode the intention, and, crucially, not take it at face value. That's part of what makes sarcasm so slippery. It lives in this in-between space. Not quite a joke, not quite a truth. It gives the speaker a kind of emotional cover. If it lands well, I meant it. If it doesn't, I didn't. That ambiguity protects the person using it, but it also puts all the emotional burden on the person receiving it. Understanding sarcasm actually requires a lot of mental work. It's tied to what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have their own thoughts, feelings, and intentions. You're not just listening to the words, you're interpreting tone, body language, social cues, and emotional history, all in real time. That's why sarcasm can be so confusing. It doesn't just ask the listener to understand the joke, it asks them to manage the emotional tone of the moment, even when that moment feels loaded or unclear. And here's the deeper truth. Sarcasm isn't just about cleverness. It's often about control. It's a way to say something difficult without being fully accountable for saying it. It gives the speaker distance from their own message. And in relationships, especially emotionally intimate ones, that distance can start to feel like distrust. So when someone says something sarcastic, they're not just making a joke. They're also sending a message about how close they're willing to be. how much truth they're comfortable showing, and how much responsibility they're willing to take for what they just said. So, why do people lean on sarcasm in the first place? Most of the time, it's not because they're mean, it's because sarcasm works. It's efficient. It lets people say hard things without risking too much emotional exposure. It softens the blow while still delivering the message. And for many people, it becomes a kind of social reflex, one they may not even realize they're using. One major reason people use sarcasm is emotional protection. When you grow up in an environment where being direct leads to punishment, rejection, or ridicule, you learn to sidestep vulnerability. Sarcasm becomes a kind of armor. Instead of saying, I feel hurt, you say, oh, great job, that was brilliant. Instead of asking for support, you make a joke. It creates just enough emotional distance to feel safe. Sarcasm is also a way to manage power. It allows the speaker to critique, mock, or challenge someone else without going head on. That indirectness can feel clever, even charming, but it can also be a form of quiet control. Because if I say something sarcastic and you don't laugh, you look like the one who can't take a joke. I get to keep my image. You're left sorting through the discomfort. There's also a social reward built into sarcasm. In a lot of cultures, especially Western ones, sarcasm is treated as a sign of wit. It's the currency of sitcoms, workplace banter, and even family dinners. People who are sarcastic are often seen as smart, quick, and entertaining. And that kind of reinforcement is powerful. It teaches us that sarcasm is a way to belong, but that belonging comes at a cost. If your humor always comes with a sting, people might stop trusting you with their more vulnerable parts. They might laugh, but they won't confide. They'll listen, but they'll stay guarded. Over time, sarcasm can build walls where you thought you were building rapport. And for some people, sarcasm becomes so ingrained that it starts replacing honesty altogether. If you always make jokes about your frustration, your sadness, your disappointment, those emotions never get a clear voice. They just keep leaking out sideways. So yes, sarcasm can be funny. It can even be a form of bonding. But more often than we admit, it's also a form of emotional evasion. It tells the truth without owning the truth. And when that becomes a pattern, it doesn't just affect how we talk, it affects how we're perceived and how safe other people feel around us. Let's talk about what it's like to be on the receiving end of sarcasm. For some people, it feels like nothing. It rolls off. They laugh along. They might even fire something back. But for many others, sarcasm lands with a quiet sting. Not loud, not dramatic, just subtle enough to make you wonder if you imagined it. Because sarcasm creates a kind of emotional double bind. If you say something, if you admit it hurt, you're told you're overreacting. If you don't say anything, you're stuck holding the discomfort alone. Either way, the emotional cost is yours. And over time, that starts to add up. You begin to question your instincts. Was that actually rude? Or am I being too sensitive? Did they mean it? Are they annoyed with me and just hiding it under a joke? You start rehearsing what you should have said. You start bracing. And without realizing it, you begin pulling back, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes even physically. One of the hardest parts of being on the receiving end of sarcasm is that it rarely feels safe to name the hurt. If you speak up, you risk being shamed for not having a sense of humor. You risk being painted as fragile or dramatic. So most people don't say anything. They just make a note. This person isn't safe for honesty. That's how sarcasm erodes trust. Not all at once, but one sharp remark at a time. Especially when it comes from someone close, a partner, a parent, a friend, a boss. When someone you care about uses sarcasm regularly, it creates an atmosphere of emotional uncertainty. You're never quite sure what's real. You're never quite sure how they really feel about you. And that confusion has consequences. It's emotionally disorganizing. It creates a form of low-level relational tension that never fully resolves. Because unlike direct conflict, sarcasm doesn't invite repair. It just lingers. It makes people feel a little smaller, a little more self-conscious. and a lot less willing to open up. In some cases, sarcasm becomes part of something even more harmful. When it's used repeatedly to undermine, to belittle, or to mask hostility, it starts to look a lot like emotional manipulation, especially when the person using it hides behind phrases like, "I was only joking," or "you're too sensitive." That kind of gaslighting adjacent response doesn't just dismiss your feelings, it teaches you not to trust them. And when that becomes the norm in a relationship, people stop being real with each other. They start editing themselves, guarding their words, avoiding emotional depth. Because somewhere along the way, sarcasm made it clear vulnerability isn't welcome here. So here's the thing, sarcasm isn't inherently toxic. It's not always cruel, and it doesn't always hurt. Like any form of communication, its impact depends on context, intention, and relationship. In some relationships, sarcasm does work. It becomes a kind of shared language, light, playful, and safe. Two people who trust each other, who understand each other deeply, can use sarcasm as a form of mutual teasing or humor. It works because the foundation is solid, the emotional floor is steady. They both know it's not a weapon. It's not hiding anything. It's just one of many ways they speak to each other. But that kind of dynamic is rare, and it only works when both people feel safe, emotionally attuned, and secure in their bond. If one person secretly feels hurt or routinely finds themselves the butt of the joke, then the dynamic shifts. What once felt playful starts to feel pointed. What once felt like intimacy starts to feel like quiet dismissal. It also matters who holds the power. A sarcastic joke from a peer might land fine, but the same joke from a parent, a manager, or a teacher carries more weight. When sarcasm comes from someone with authority, it can easily feel shaming, especially if the recipient doesn't feel allowed to respond honestly. It stops being a joke and starts being a form of masked control. Sarcasm also gets riskier in emotionally loaded moments. If there's already tension, sarcasm can come across as avoidance, mockery, or passive aggression. It might be intended to break the ice, but it often deepens the freeze. The key question is this: is sarcasm being used to connect or to deflect? Is it building warmth or pushing discomfort underground? Is it something both people feel safe using? Or is one person always the target while the other holds the mic? When sarcasm functions as mutual play, it can be bonding, but when it functions as an emotional shortcut, or worse, as a shield for contempt, it starts to chip away at the emotional foundation of the relationship. So no, sarcasm isn't always wrong, but it is always revealing. It shows how we manage emotional risk. It shows what we're willing to say directly and what we aren't. Cultural implications and emotional literacy. We live in a culture that elevates sarcasm as a sign of intelligence. It's everywhere, in television, in classrooms, on social media. The sarcastic friend, the quick-witted boss, the deadpan teenager. It's presented as edgy, modern, even desirable. But what does it mean that we find sincerity awkward and irony charming? What does it say about our emotional culture when mockery is more acceptable than vulnerability? Part of the reason sarcasm thrives is that we often don't have another language for emotional discomfort. We haven't been taught how to say, "I'm disappointed," or "I feel dismissed," or "that bothered me." So we say it sideways. We make it funny. We pretend we don't care, because that's what we've learned to do. There's a gap in emotional literacy here. A gap between what people feel and what they're allowed to express. And sarcasm fills that gap. It becomes a socially acceptable way to discharge tension without being accused of taking things too seriously.
But that coping strategy has a cost, because when sarcasm becomes our default, it starts to train us out of directness, out of honesty, out of intimacy. And that affects more than our relationships. It affects our internal clarity too. The more we rely on sarcasm, the harder it becomes to even know what we're feeling underneath.
Culturally, we reward cleverness more than emotional maturity. And while wit has its place, it can't carry the weight of relational trust. So if we want a culture that's more emotionally aware, we have to be willing to value sincerity, not as weakness, but as strength. Closing reflection. So here's what I hope you take away from this. Sarcasm is a tool, but like any tool, it can be used to build or to break. If you use sarcasm regularly, ask yourself, what am I protecting? What am I avoiding? What would happen if I just said what I meant? And if you're on the receiving end and you felt that subtle sting, that moment of laughter wrapped in unease, you're not overreacting. You're just noticing what's real. Your discomfort is information. It's telling you something about how safe you feel. And that matters. The goal here isn't to make everyone walk on eggshells. It's to invite more awareness, to recognize that our words do more than pass the time. They shape the emotional contracts between us. Because jokes are never just jokes. They are data. They are signals. And they tell the people around us whether it's safe to be real. So whether you love sarcasm or hate it, it's worth asking. Is it helping you be known or just helping you stay hidden?
That's it for today's episode of The Psychology of Us with Professor R.J. Starr. If something in this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who'd appreciate it. To explore more episodes, essays, letters from listeners, and tons of free psychology tools and educational resources, visit profrjstarr.com. That's PROFRJSTARR.com. And if you haven't already, subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time on The Psychology of Us.